afternoon. Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm first of all amazingly impressed that pretty much everyone's still here. You haven't run off. The energy is still high, it's wonderful. But here we are at the end of our 3 days. I think it has been quite intense, lots and lots of material. So we're going to just have a kind of a fairly short wrap-up session. And actually what we thought we'd do, and just have, because I know that everyone is a little bit torn and with sessions to go to and so much going on, and so we thought we'd have a few of the moderators of particular sessions come up and give a quick little summary, especially those that had something concluded that they want to share, that's what's sort of going to happen next. And so I'm going to ask them to come and just share for 2 or 3 minutes each some thoughts. We're going to, first of all, is Sogi there? Here you are. Sogi's going to tell us a little bit about next steps with the guidelines.
So, thanks for staying on. One of the things that struck me about the guidelines is just how engaged everybody was in the session itself, but also a few of you have come up and asked a number of questions, some of you the same question. So I'd like to repeat a few things. First of all, the guidelines are not a finished product. It's the start of a product. We've literally put some bullet points down on a page. Okay, there's a lot of bullet points. This is a complex issue. But what we need to do now is field test them, get case examples from projects, see what works, what doesn't work. You are all experts in your respective fields. We have to put them into context, into different languages. Use them, adapt them, work with them. Tell me what works, tell us what works, what doesn't work. Some of the most pertinent questions that kept coming up is that there's a couple of missing aspects. So a few of you have come up to me and said, we need to talk about animal welfare. And I think maybe there might be some scope in future iterations of the guidelines to put these in annexes at some point, or maybe integrate them. The other question that kept coming up was, where do you draw the line from pest management to human-wildlife conflicts? You know, it's on a spectrum. And again, maybe that's something that we can address in an annex as well. So, thank you very much. This is the start of the product, not the end of the product, and I think I'll stop there. But it is all of our collective guidelines, not the task forces or the specialist groups guidelines. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sari. There was a session on the first day on the future of European carnivores, and I'd like John Linnell to just give us his concluding thoughts from that.
I finally get to try the big stage. Ooh, with the big boys. Wow, it's bright up here. No, so we had a very interesting discussion in our workshop, and a couple of conclusions came out of that. And one is that we tried to have a panel debate, but it wasn't actually a debate, it was a conversation. There seems to have been such an incredible convergence of thinking. And I think that's actually infiltrated the whole conference, is that we're all more or less on the same page, that we're bringing different case studies and different species, but I think this understanding of conflict and things has really had an incredible convergence. So certainly our debate, this turned out to be a conversation, which kind of reflects this, I think, this building of a consensus, which the guidelines, I think, in a way formalize to an extent. Some of the messages coming out of the kind of European discussion were about what does coexistence can look like? Because our context is not saving species from the edge of extinction, but it's about trying to live with the success of a 30, 40, 50-year conservation process. And a couple of themes emerge out of here, which I think are quite useful, with a general kind of relevance beyond Europe. One is that there's not one answer, right? Kind of coexistence is not like, say, climate issues, which are like one solution, stop carbon. Coexistence is very contextual. So every country, every region is going to have some own version of how that coexistence is actually going to look. The other point is that coexistence is not a state. And I think we often talk about conflict as a state. and coexistence as an alternative state that would like to get to and sit inside it and be comfortable in this new kind of stable state. And I think we really quickly realized that it's not a state, it's a process. We're never going to get to the goal. You know, life is a journey, right? And this journey to coexistence is going to be an eternal journey. Because as soon as we get somewhere, the world's going to have changed. Society's changed, the economics has changed, the climate has changed, the ecology has changed, and we're probably always going to be 2 or 3 steps behind. So we're managing process. I think Brian also summarized that yesterday when he was asked about solutions to conflicts. And he said there weren't solutions, but they were just processes to manage them. So I think that's something we need to think about when it comes to coexistence. It's just a process, it's a managed process, and we're managing change, trying to keep the ship going in a more or less the right direction and keep it off the rocks and the reefs on different sides. But it's not definitely going to land anywhere. It's going to keep on sailing forever. Which means we always have a job, right? And then we can keep coming back to Oxford every couple of years. So it's great, because if we could finish the work, we'd be unemployed, right? So this is good news. I think a final insight that came here is that part of this kind of consensus around conflict and coexistence, that this is actually a conservation discourse that we seem to have agreed on, but it's very different from some of the other conservation discourses out there. You know, we have these competing conservation discourses like wilderness and rewilding and those things, and no one's been speaking about those discourses. We've been speaking about nature and humans as a very closely intertwined and interactive social ecological system, where people and nature are constantly interacting in all sorts of complicated and messy ways. And this is sort of, we've all taken that for granted in this room for the last 3 days. But that is not a universal understanding of conversation, of conservation, especially when you look in like the pages of the journals and the popular media. You know, they're portraying these, you know, nature over here and people over there things, and we're portraying a very different discourse. So there's quite a few interesting things which came out of our discussion. And I don't think these are specific to Europe. I think this concerns most conservation contexts. So, no, that was really all I had to say. Apart from, it's been really great fun. So thank you, Alex, for bringing us here.
Thanks, John. Yesterday we also ran a session on finance and resource mobilization, which John Scanlon was very generous to moderate expertly for us, and John's going to tell us a few thoughts from that.
Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon, all. Actually, I co-moderated with Alex yesterday. We had a wonderful session. We were grateful that we had representatives of 7 donors join us, but we also had a very engaged and animated audience, which made it a very vibrant session. The objective of the exercise was to draw out from the donors what their perspective was, because a lot of us are recipients and we are pitching to donors all the time. The objective here was to draw from them what their take on it was. And the first thing we asked them was what it was that motivated them or inspired them to come to this event. And do you know what the primary answer was? Because Alex invited them. So Alex had a very significant impact on the attendance at this conference, not only with the donors, but with all of us. But they also showed a very deep and interest in the topic. And some are investing in the issue already, and others are thinking about it. And in terms of human-wildlife conflict and coexistence, some are investing, some said they were here to learn, others look at it from a landscape context, some look at it a more sort of smaller sense in terms of direct interventions. But they are all interested in one way or another or investing across the spectrum of opportunities there. Now, some of the issues that were raised and discussed, this is some, not all, but the critical importance of engaging with communities, of bringing people together, bringing different sectors together. And one issue that was raised is how do we avoid funding going to those who are best at promoting themselves? Because the ones that are best at promoting themselves and profiling themselves are not always the best at implementing. And this was raised in the context in particular of local women who are getting on and doing the job and are not focusing on promoting themselves, but sometimes that means the resources don't flow through to them. So how can we deal with that? There was an issue about the insufficient percentage of funding actually getting to the ground and having an impact, and a very small percentage was given in the context of one particular project. There were issues to do with donors themselves, and this came from one of the donors to say we need to be more bold as donors. We need to push our boards to invest more in conservation and invest more in this issue. So they were taking that upon themselves. There was also the issue of government funding, that philanthropic funding is important, but you also have to get funding from governments at a national level, and how do we mobilise that? And there was the issue raised, it was an interesting one, about putting a mirror up to ourselves, that there are some contradictions here in how some in the West call for protection of species elsewhere compared to what they're prepared to tolerate at home. And then there was the issue raised about challenges posed by the current capitalist system and how it exacerbates inequity. Do you know who raised that? Greta. So I think the most animated discussion was around why it has become so complicated to apply for funding, with those who are at the receiving end saying it's getting more and more complex in terms of applying, the documents you have to fill out, etc., etc. Why can't it be more simple? And the response revolved around the question of trust. And the issue was raised about trust-based philanthropy. But it was said that this is a two-way street, that those who are applicants and recipients need to demonstrate trust by being honest and transparent, including in recognising failures. But donors themselves have to do it by not becoming too distant from the field. And there was comments made by some that some of the donors are becoming quite remote from what they're actually investing in. So how do we avoid that? How do you build trust? You don't build trust through documents, you build trust by getting together and building a personal relationship. Overall, I'd say very positive. Donors were engaged, supportive, recognised the excellent work of the specialist group and of Alexandra, and so I think it was great to have them here, hear their perspective, and the good news is it looks as though they're going to invest in the issues we're also vested in. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. So just in the previous session, we had the big session on human-elephant conflict, Africa and Asia combined, which Brian McQuinn and Greta ran together, and I'm going to ask Greta to tell us her concluding thoughts on this.
Thank you, Alex. So indeed, we had a high-level panel session which also had a unique spin on it because we integrated all the attendees and also used the Menti Cloud. Some of you might be familiar with it, but it's you put up a QR code and then everyone in the panel can put in words that were interrogating two questions essentially. How do we get to live in coexistence with humans and elephants both in Africa and Asia? And also, what does coexistence look like between humans and elephants? And then the second question was, how do we get there? It was a really interesting discussion. We, of course, had only 90 minutes, and we understand that a colossal session asking such questions is not going to produce the all-inclusive answers, but it was amazing. Because in order to achieve coexistence between humans and land's largest mammal, experts from various fields, including the governments that were there representing Africa from Mozambique and Kenya, and also the Asian perspective represented by India. These were some of the points that were shared. We need vertical integration, local, regional, transboundary level understanding, and needs must be captured and shared both between continents effectively. Human-elephant conflict affects us all. This was an overarching comment. It is everyone's responsibility to find solutions and stakeholder integration, to find solutions and champion ways of engaging our governments between continents with context-specific land use planning at the highest level. We need to educate the new generation on coexisting with wildlife, as they will be the ones carrying the work forward. We must facilitate and ensure that a coexistent vision is based on sound policies involving a range of decision makers and researchers and adequate capacity for implementation. We should not be afraid of being more radical to propose ways to integrate elephant corridors into human settlements and even rethink where human populations should be concentrated and in a sense, manage elephant populations better that way in a more sustainable manner. We must fight for sustainable and adequate global funding, reparations, and distribution of that funding with a people-centric approach. And finally, we hope that this lays the foundation for the long-needed conversation around human-elephant conflict between the two continents with a specific conference that looks at human-elephant conflict alone. Thank you.
Thanks, Greta. And finally, I'm going to ask Silvio Macchini to report on the session on Latin America, which was on this morning.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. Our session aimed to explore ways to improve collaboration, starting in the session itself, engaging the audience together with the panelists in the discussion around the two fundamental questions. What are the problems related to human-wildlife conflict and coexistence governance common among countries in the region, and what are the concrete steps we can take to overcome those problems and improve collaboration? With the excellent facilitation from Jamie Copsey, we ensured good use of time, generating information recorded in tens of Mentimeter responses and a few full flip chart sheets. But the most important output of the session, however, was the list of over 30 people interested in continuing the discussion. What we did in the session didn't end there. The discussion will continue within the specialist group and now with the contribution of the group formed in the session. How exactly we're going to move forward and expand and effectively improve collaboration in Latin America remains to be seen, but we're sure we now have the right group to kickstart. And I think what we are sure about is the principles that will guide our effort. These principles are beautifully encapsulated in two words that Ivone Higuero emphasized in our session: patience and empathy. That's it. I hope I will see you next time at the next conference in 2025, which I heard will be in Latin America, overlooking the magnificent Iguazu Falls, both from the Brazilian and the Argentinian side. And, I'm kidding.
Silvia, that is extremely tempting. So thanks for the bid, yes. Well, I guess I would like to invite anybody else also who wants to share any thoughts or conclusions to jump in at any time. But there are lots and lots more sessions. I believe it was nearly 50 in total. I know some of you were torn which ones to go to, and I really want to thank the moderators and the organizers and of all of those sessions for your excellent work in that. And another very big important thing was, of course, that this is extremely timely, as Yvonne said in her keynote this morning, because even though we have had this 3-year COVID delay, and that's been a little bit frustrating, in the end, that's actually turned out to be quite serendipitous and has made this conference even more timely, because meanwhile, we now have human-wildlife conflict in the global biodiversity framework, and that this has been kind of 3 months after that was signed off, and it's great to now launch this effort and really keep that momentum going. And so we did also have a discussion yesterday on the next step in that global policy process, which is about figuring out what the indicator for measuring human-wildlife conflict should be for all countries. Now, those of you who weren't there can imagine already from that how complicated that is going to be. And so what we're going to do there is invite anyone who is interested and can provide expertise and ideas in that from governments and from scientists and any other sectors. You're warmly welcome to join in that process and take part. There will be all sorts of online discussions to follow that up, and we will probably try and facilitate a working group, an ad hoc working group, between now and COP16 to see how far we can get in putting together the beginnings of a robust framework for measuring human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. So it was then also, really excellent to have David Cooper, the acting executive secretary of the CBD, speak to us in the very beginning and remind us of the importance of this right now on the global stage. And so with that, I also want to thank the excellent keynote speakers for their fantastic range of presentations. What I personally loved about it was that there was such a mix, and they covered such very different topics. And so it was wonderful to have John Kamanga, who has already left us, unfortunately, he had to run, but to have his perspective of how communities need to govern their coexistence with wildlife. We had really wonderful examples from Gabriela Lichtenstein and from Barbara Chesier about the really local examples of how you can make it work and what their day-to-day challenges are. And there's completely different examples from implementing insurance in Kenya to running the overlap between sustainable use and human-wildlife conflict in Argentina. We then had Ganesh, still I'm somewhere, kick off a really lively discussion later on in the financing situation, in the financing session, and really seed some thoughts in there that were extremely valuable in your keynote to get us thinking about how do we resource mobilize this whole field and what to look for. We had David McDonald give us the most rapid, incredible volume of science and a run-through of all the kinds of different studies that have been done even just in Wild Crew, and amplify that by 100 by all the hundreds of studies on human wildlife already done. I think it was Silvio who one point did a study of the how many papers have been published on this subject over the last decade, and it was an exponential curve. And it's really interesting to also look into the language, that the word coexistence has shot up dramatically. But we know that human-wildlife conflict as a research field has exploded. We see that in journals. And so this is, for example, several journals have entire sections now dedicated to that. One of our sponsors of the conference, Frontiers in Conservation Science. The vast majority of submissions are on human-wildlife conflict, which has nothing to do with the fact that I'm one of the editors. But also there's another new journal that Haimso Campos Arces is the editor of, called Integrative Conservation, also looking for these kinds of submissions. So that's wonderful to see. And so this is all about bringing together that science, that learning, the rigorous academic look into it, the practitioners, the community view of it, and bringing that all together. But as Brian McQuinn reminded us here with his wonderful quotes and stories, it is not easy, not at all. And what I really liked about Brian's talk is I felt quite reassured by having someone who works in violent war situations tell us that we have a difficult job. Oddly, that felt a little bit like, okay, we are maybe not doing that badly, we're trying pretty hard here. But those kinds of lessons from completely different fields, from peace building and from economics or from philosophy even, or all the different kinds of sciences and humanities, is what we need to bring together here. And I think this is what makes this subject, to me at least, so fascinating. This is why I've been doing this for 25 years, and I'm simply not getting bored of it. But it requires efforts on all these different scales. And what is also fascinating is that here we are dealing with the global context of a policy for 196 countries, and then we're dealing with these village scale lessons to be learned, and how do we make those lessons connect with each other. And so trying to facilitate that connective learning is something that the specialist group that's just our role to try and do as best as we can. And of course we want everybody to be involved in trying to make that happen. So what's next? Well, obviously there's another conference next year, or not. No, but definitely we'd already realized back 3 years ago when we were really surprised by the level of interest in this, when we first said, let's have a conference on this, and we just flooded with interest, and we thought, wow, okay. And then the delay, and so it became clear that this cannot be a one-off. And so the intention is, or the suggestion, shall I say, is that let's think of this as the global kickoff, the kind of international one, and then let's take it on tour around the world. And let's have the next one, well, we'll have in Iguazu Falls, apparently. Have you got a big hall like this with pictures? And so we'll have a little bit of a wrangle about who will host it next, but it should certainly be in the Global South, absolutely. And it should allow for a more regional focus and access to everybody. And we've got a few years, I would say, let's aim for about 3 years. 2026, would it be okay? And let's meet up again then. So what tends to happen with these events, and what has made me so happy in these last few days, is to see how much energy there has been, and to see all the coffee breaks. There was constant chatter and buzz, and everyone's talking to each other. And so I'm just so pleased that, as I said in the beginning, I wanted you to do 2 things. One was go to a session that you wouldn't normally go to and try and learn, hear something new, see if it triggers any ideas, thoughts. And I think people did that. Who here did that? Did you go to listen to something different? Great. And to use the long coffee breaks and this opportunity to talk, to make new friends, make new collaborations, make new cooperations. And I hope that most of you will go away and actually have new projects together or new initiatives or form new groups. And in any way that we can help support that, we're there as well. Now, of course, the energy is high here. Then you leave, you go on quite some very long travels back home. And you get back to your busy lives, and that's good. And so, does it all die down between now and the next conference in 3 years? Well, it doesn't need to, because another silver lining of the pandemic has been that we are all now very at ease with Zoom. And we know the downsides of Zoom. And we couldn't have done this on Zoom. But it means, I see it as a kind of intermediary. It's a good vehicle to keep this going. So there's no reason you can't continue to forge those new connections or strengthen these ones that you've started here and continue to learn about different subjects. And we can have webinars, and you can all tell each other about what's going on. We can disseminate that. So I would say, please engage. If we keep all doing that, reach out to each other, then we can keep this momentum going and not let it die off here. So I'd really love to see that happen. And so with that, I think we can wrap up, and I just really, really want to thank so many people. I want to thank, first of all, our major partners who helped make this happen really substantively, the Jeff-led and World Bank-run Global Wildlife Program. They brought in around 30-ish governments and helped bring that into the whole discussion, and that has been so valuable. And also Wild Crew of Oxford University, which, as you've seen, has brought in so many. Wild Crew is a super international group, and many of the international students and our alumni and current students of Wild Crew, and bringing their insights into this has been wonderful. I'm super grateful to the many funders who helped make it happen in the end. Because it became a larger event than we had anticipated, we had to scramble to quickly find a bit more support, and they came in. And for example, Fondation Segré funded about 30 people to fly in, and the Rufford Foundation and WCN and Elephant Family all pitched in and helped make it happen. The British Asian Trust and so many others just helped make this possible in the end. And so finally, personally, my biggest thanks goes to the specialist group, who are my best friends in this topic, the wonderful members of the specialist group. 40 of them are here, and you've all worked super hard on helping make this happen. Many of you organized the session, and we had endless Zoom calls to prepare all of this, and I'm so, so grateful. And of them, top thanks goes to James Stevens, our program officer. Where are you, James? He's not here. Oh, and there he is. The fact that James was not in the room tells you how hard he works. He was even still checking everything is all right. Thank you, James. And also, Luna Milatovic, who has only joined us 2 months ago, hit the ground absolutely. We just threw everything at you immediately. Go, run with it. Didn't even have time to sort of, have a smooth transition for you, and you did incredibly well. And you're helping us bring this, work with the whole policy, bringing it to the global policy stage with us. So I look forward to doing more of it, and thank you. And thank you to the venue, of course, for this fantastic. This has been wonderful to have Michelle Miles, who helped us with the innumerable logistics and the absolute things that we would never have thought of. Michelle made sure that it would run smoothly. So if you hopefully thought it was relatively smoothly organized, this is thanks to Michelle. She's hiding. But also James and Luna, absolutely, and the specialist group, every one of you. So thank you. I'm going to close it there because we don't want to ramble all.